All right. So if you don't know what technocracy is, it is a movement created by Howard Scott in the 1930s, who wanted to convert all humans into a number, the number being the amount of energy you could produce throughout your life. And then they would give you $20,000 a year in 1930s money. I mean, you're basically like living in a mansion. But they would give you $20,000 a year for life as per your quantifiable energy production as a human being. These energy bucks would be uh, essentially, I don't know, signed or authorized so that they are only yours. Your family, children can't inherit them. Nobody else can use them. How they got to that point, nobody knows. However, with Bitcoin, we kind of see exactly how that would play out. And so, in any case, the idea was that there would be a bloodless revolution. You wouldn't need politicians or bureaucracy or governmental systems. It would all be controlled by scientists and mathematicians who excelled and were academically credentialed, top of their field. They would receive an influx of information based on technical capabilities and outputs, and they would make calculations and decisions that would benefit mankind. And so here you can see, let me just see if I can zoom in here. Yeah, there we go. You can see here that you have a robot handing out energy bucks, and you would just go use that to procure materials that you needed. And so the concept here was that nobody would need to steal anymore, because why would anybody steal energy bucks that they can't use? Nobody would need to worry about work. You would be placed in whatever is appropriate for your condition. They have a study course. The concept being that the scientific method, according to them, clearly indicates that humans are no different than machines or animals. It's just electrical inputs and outputs. And so, based on that, the technocratic movement started to grow and spawn in different ways. We covered how Howard Scott buddied up with Margaret Mead. Margaret Mead was a feminist who promoted things like fluidity and gender and whatnot, because she herself was also at least a little dropping hints that she participated in that. Her and her husband, Margaret Mead's husband Bateson, participated in LSD experiments to look at mind control, because they saw humans as just energy inputs and outputs, and so psychedelics could help you with mind control in that respect. So they worked with the CIA to do that. And then cybernetics came up. We went over 60s and 70s, how cybernetics started to pop up. And as a result of these kinds of ideas, we then started to see cyborgs and the merging of man and machine. We talked about transhumanism. We talked about Brave New World. We talked about Huxley. We talked about continual experiments on data, as data became more accessible and started to be transmitted faster and faster. How, for example, I believe it was the CEO of PepsiCo said the best way to gather data about human beings is to watch, not ask, and gave the idea, or yeah, gave the example of a father constantly putting, fruits and veggies in his son's lunchbox. The son comes home having not eaten them, and so then the PepsiCo CEO says it would be better if you just watched what happened, because if you ask the dad, he would say the most important part of the son's lunch is the vegetables, but according to what the son does, no, it ain't. Okay, and so that kind of takes us to the 80s now. The 80s. The 80s. Now, in 1980, I was but a young spermatozoid in my dad's ball sack. One of these ball sacks. I was a spermatozoid running around. Okay, you can see I was a spermatocele stem cell is what I was. I was running around in one of my dad's ball sacks in here. Okay, so my dad was like running around his smacking around. Ouch, ouch. Okay, and then as 1980s continued, we then start to see a second wave of cybernetics. Now, what happened with technocracy and cybernetics is that it started to decrease. It kind of went through what's called like a depression period, where the concepts were they still existed, and they were reformulating based on changes in the ethos of the world. But you didn't see so many things like technocracy and cybernetics, and say even cyborgs wasn't like a very as prominent as it was coming up to the 80s. It changed. And what you started to see was that the ideas behind them started to integrate in other ways. If you remember things like in 1980s, who remember like Knight Rider, right? I don't. Yeah, 1980s Knight Rider, right? Knight Rider. You started to see things like AI being integrated into cars. That was kind of like the first of its kind. Where did the idea of Knight Rider come from? We're going to find out. We're going to see how DARPA was involved in that. Yes, we're going to talk about DARPA. There's all kinds of space shows. Like if we just look up like 1980s space shows, right? There's all kinds. We have 10 best sci-fi shows from the 80s. We have some Star Trek stuff, right? We have Star Wars. The concept of these kind of technocratic cybernetic movements started to change and adapt, and it was fostering countercultures, and we talked about that. For example, in California, countercultures started to arise, which were really just, I want to create my own utopian system, and I want to integrate mainstream stuff and use it as a Trojan horse for other things that I would like to do. So during the 80s, these things were playing out. You also have video games coming out in the 80s, right? So you have like video games becoming very, very popularized in the 80s, so that you have a digital extension of inputs and outputs so that you could play, all kinds of stuff here. You've got Pac-Man in arcades, man, arcades in the 80s, right? Right. And so things started to change where, I don't know, in the 80s, there was like hope. Do you know what I mean? A bunch of stuff happened between like the 50s and the 70s, and it was bad. And in the 80s, things started to change, and you kind of started to see a lot of this technological stuff change into something where it's like, man, the future is starting to look kind of bright. And the reason why the future was looking bright was because under the covers of what was going on in the 80s, things were a brewing. All right, things were a brewing. And we're going to talk about the 90s too, but let's we'll go into that. So we begin with something called the L5 Society. It was founded in 1975 by a group of people. They merged with the National Space Institute to form the National Space Society. Now, who was the National Space Institute? Well, the National Space Institute was established by Wernher von Braun. Who was Wernher von Braun? He was a German-American aerospace engineer and space architect. He was a member of a word I cannot say, leading figure in the development of rocket technology in Germany. And the reason why he was part of the National Space Institute, I don't think this goes into it, but here, well, let's have a brief look at it. Project Paperclip. If you do not know what Project Paperclip is, Operation Paperclip. Essentially, through National Archive public data, which you are more than welcome to go look at yourself. It's in the National Archives, and there is a book by someone's last name named Jacobson, I believe, who wrote about this. At the end of the Second World War, the United States went essentially something like this. Those Germans actually had some pretty smart technology. And sure, maybe we won the war because of the atomic level of our destructive power. However, they built some pretty insane stuff, and if we hadn't beat them to the punch, Germany would have got a handle on us. Let's take the scientists from Germany and bring them over here. But alas, there is an issue. Germany and the acts during World War II that they took against a particular group were absolutely atrocious. How on earth would the United States morally, ethically make the case that we should bring these scientists over here? And according to the publicly available National Archive information, they expunged their records in the German party. so that it could not be found, at least for some. Now, as it so happens, one of the scientists that were brought in, we're going to tie this in together just in a second here. Here is a patent. And this patent is one of the early patents that we use, one of the early hardware-based patents of a piece of hardware that we use today. So here we go. This is it. And this is a semiconductor created by Kurt Lehevek. And Kurt Lehevek was one of the people who were brought in by Operation Paperclip. So the semiconductors that we have today running in your machines right now, where you are viewing your glorious journalist from, are based on the premise of the first semiconductor patent. This person was not exactly from Germany. He was a Czech Republic scientist of some kind. However, this is what Project Operation Paperclip brought in. And so back now to the L5 Society. So the L5 Society became part of this German party group backed system, which became the National Space Society, the NSS, an American international nonprofit, which then ties into NASA, but that is beyond the scope of this stream, okay? Beyond the scope of this stream. We're not going to talk about that, all right? I love my life. I want to be clear. Listen, let me be clear. I love my life, okay? I love my wife and kid. I do not want to 404 myself, all right? Okay? So just if something happens to me, all right? I'm just covering the news here as it pertains to programming. So why do I bring up the L5 Society? Because the L5 Society had the same kind of utopian vision that we've talked about. So this is an artist's conception of a space habitat called the Stanford Torus. And so here you can see a picture of the Stanford Torus. It was proposed by NASA via Operation Paperclip. And the idea here is that you would have permanent residence out in space. Now, in order to achieve this utopia, much like the Venus project we covered yesterday with Jacques Fresco, the idea here is that you would have to participate in some kind of transhumanist movement or even become transhumanist yourself. In other words, cyborgs. So if we go down here, what we lead to is, let me just see if I can find the right link. Okay. The L5 Society failed to achieve the goal of human settlements in space. It did serve, though, as a focal point for many of the people who later became known in fields such as, NASA, rocketry, etc. But also nanotechnology, memetics, extropianism, cryonics, long-term freezing, transhumanism, artificial intelligence, and tether propulsion. One of these persons was K. Eric Drexler. Now, we're not going to get into Drexler. That's kind of a different line. I have to do a little bit of research into him, but Drexler is a very familiar name that you'll probably recognize if I bring him up. But in any case, let's jump into Hans Moravec. Now, let me see if I have, not that one. Here we go. Hans Moravec. He was born in Austria in 1948. He is a computer scientist, or was a computer scientist. He was a faculty member at the Robotics Institute of Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, USA. He is known for his works on robotics, artificial intelligence, and the impacts of technology. He was also a futurist, focusing on transhumanism. He developed techniques in computer vision for determining the region of interest in a scene. And so as part of his work in the AI space, for example, he earned a PhD in computer science from Stanford in 1980 for a TV-equipped robot, which was remotely controlled by a large computer, the Stanford cart. The robot was able to negotiate cluttered obstacle courses. So here again, we see from the results of Operation Paperclip and the emerging of it with, German technology mixed in with, American academic criterion and funding. we have the advancement of AI now, where robots are not just beginning but continuing to be made. Another achievement in robotics was the discovery of new approaches for robot spatial representation, such as 3D occupancy grid. He also developed the idea of bush robots, a hypothetical machine whose body branches in a fractal way into trillions of nanoscale figures to achieve very high dexterity and reconfigurability. Now, let's have a look at this. So this is part of the kind of like the precursor to nanotechnology. And as it turns out, he presented a report to NASA in 1999, who projected that development of the necessary technology will take half a century. So you can now see that there is actually a massive integration of these kinds of technologies, their background in history, the idea of having a technocratic future, their goals towards that, and the integration of things like NASA with them. NASA. Damn it. I'm doing, I don't know, I'm doing some kind of weird Canadian pronunciation of NASA. NASA. In any case, he continued his work, and he made some predictions. For example, he made the prediction that a computer would eventually match the human brain. And he said that that would happen in the mid 2020s. So he would see human-like robots appear in the 2020s. He talked about mind children. He had a book called Mind Children, and he used Moore's law to predict artificial life. He said robots will evolve into a new series of artificial species starting around 2030 to 2040. And he spread that idea around in the scientific community as he continued talking about nanotechnology. He was kind of, again, like I said, a precursor to it. And so then he talked about superintelligence, the idea of an integrated circuit with humans, the cyborg, etc., so on and so forth. So you can start to see how in the early 80s, these concepts, in terms of the terminology that we've been talking about them so far, changed. And so it was great for us as kids in the 1980s. We got to enjoy video games and we got to enjoy arcades. And I'm not going to lie to you, the 80s and the 90s felt the future looked like I couldn't wait for the future. You know what I mean? The games we were playing, the amount of tech that was being created, the access to information, the communities you could build, going to hang out at a friend's house and playing games, or like playing online, even over a dial-up modem. I don't know. There was just something about the 80s and the 90s that felt like there was a hopeful future, you know. But underneath the covers, there was a future being thought of and built by governments and ideas like this that were being bundled into the technologies that we were enjoying. A tale as old as time, as we have come to discover. So now if we continue, not Drexler, we'll look at Drexler later on. I believe you can see that the Drexler ran with nanotech. He called it gray goo, but we'll get into that in a different stream. Now, during this time, we have Donna Haraway. Let's just have a brief look. Let me see if I have... No. Donna Haraway. Donna Haraway was born in 1944, and she was a feminist. And so the feminist movement was going from second wave to about third wave-ish. It was getting close to the third wave. She contributed to the intersection of information technology and feminist theory. And so the idea of bundling in ideology did not go away, especially with feminism, it seems like. And she took technology and used it as a way to bundle in the feminist ideology. And so if we have a look here, she wrote a book called The Cyborg Manifesto. Now, let me just make sure that I remember the year. Manifesto. Cyborg Manifesto, where is it? 1985. There we go. Okay, so that's when the book was written, A Cyborg Manifesto, Science, Technology, and Socialist Feminist in the Late 20th Century. And you can kind of guess essentially what this was. The book was her way of describing the idea of cyborgs as a very real mechanism about which to bring feminist and gender fluidity into reality. Why? Because it is a hybrid of machine and organism, a creature of social reality as well as a creature of fiction. Social reality is lived social relations, our most important political construction, a world-changing fiction. The international women's movements have constructed women's experience as well as uncovered or discovered this crucial collective object. This experience is a fiction and a fact of the most crucial, political kind. Liberation rests on the construction of the consciousness, the imaginative apprehension of oppression, and so of possibility. The cyborg is a matter of fiction and lived experience that changes what counts as women's experience in the late 20th century. This is a struggle over life and death, but the boundary between science fiction and social reality is an optical illusion. Contemporary science fiction is full of cyborgs, creatures simultaneously animal and machine, who populate worlds ambiguously natural and crafted. Modern medicine is also full of cyborgs, of couplings between organism and machine, each conceived as coded devices, in an intimacy and with a power that was not generated in the history of sexuality. Cyborg sex restores some of the lovely replicative baroque of ferns and invertebrates, such nice organic prophylactics against heterosexism. We covered this yesterday with the AI sex robot brothels. We went over that. This is becoming a reality where the concept of interchangeable widgets, where people do not need to necessarily be stuck to their physical representation and can merge in with a technical representation. Nanotechnology played into this, particularly with Drexler and the other guy whose name escapes me at the moment, whereupon nanotechnology could be injected in your blood. You might remember certain articles I've gone over where robots in your DNA. Why do you think I cover these things? You guys remember this, right? Swarms of tiny nose robots could clear infected sinuses, right? We've covered this. And so this is why I cover what I do. You guys don't understand the multi-layered attack that I'm making. When I cover cybersecurity stuff, it's not just an attack on the tech industry right now, but it's also because you can see it right here. Even before I was born, these concepts of using technology to infiltrate people's minds and physical bodies and implement ideological rules and structures over you, they've existed since the early 30s. They've existed. The AI is nothing new. Robots are nothing new. Programming is really nothing new. We'll get into the history of programming, but that is a different line, a different train that requires its own stream to go over. But you can see right here that we have this feminist, Donna, who is using exactly the cybernetic technocratic movement to go, hey, we need people who are smart. We need to integrate socially constructed ideologies into cyborgs, like infecting or injecting your nose with robots to clear sinuses, and she uses that as a means to spread her ideology. And so, while the 80s in particular and the 90s were good times for a lot of us, this was what was brewing underneath. And she even describes it as a war. Let me see here. Yeah, here. The relation between organism and machine has been a border war. The stakes in the border war have been territories of production, reproduction, and imagination. This chapter is an augment for pleasure and the confusion of boundaries, and for responsibility in their construction. She literally says that the confusing boundaries between tech, machine, and organism, it is pleasurable. That's what pleasure is. They lean into the confusion. She literally says that. And that there is a responsibility to create or to tear down this border between machine and organism. Because ultimately, it comes out to, well, now you no longer have to submit to a patriarchal or naturalistic physical representation of your biology. You no longer have to think about man and woman. Sexual activities can expand, they can become more dynamic because now you can have the AI sex robot brothels, AI integrated into you, nanotech integrated into you, machine integrated into you. You still get to keep certain portions of your physiology in a organic way. But now imagine the kind of sex you can have. Imagine the kind of pleasure you can have. You can have sex with whomever you want. You don't have to be male or female. All of this, all of the issues around reproduction, all of the reproduction issues that women are facing, it's all gone. We tear down the borders and we use our socially constructed ideas and we implement them in the technical space, and you merge with it, right? You can recreate something that would be a utopia. And so this whole thing, I'm not going to read it all because it's just like, it's crazy, right? It's crazy how much she goes into it. But she presents this idea in this book. I might have to read it in full in order to understand this more as I go into, as we get closer to the 2010s and 2020s, how these things became far more prominent. And I'm going to have to read it more and tie it into a lot of the studies that I'm starting to read. There is a reason why I brought up that study. I've brought up 2 or 3 already with regards to transgender movements like within video games, intersectional diversity within programming, the studies that go into like self-reported discrimination due to biases. There's a reason why I'm talking about this stuff. I know it's boring and I know it doesn't become clear at first, but I've been building up to this for the last 1.5 years on these streams. And it all ties in together. What plays out before us today in those boring streams and the boring cybersecurity stuff is now starting to play out in the historical narrative I'm presenting here. This is not the first time. So I'm going to leave this, be here. I'm going to look at this later, but essentially you get the point. Now, if I go back over here, okay, so the reason why I brought up Donna Haraway here in particular is because she did work in she was highly recognized during her tenure as someone who should be looked at for things like psychological studies, sociological studies, even some biology and philosophy. She received the highest honors of alumni from Yale University. She hobnobbed with a lot of other people around her who took cues from her work, including this. And so you can see how these kinds of ideas would spread. If you have somebody like this who believes this and wants to spread it, wants to, use technocratic structures to promote her view on the world, you can see how those ideas would kind of like seep into other aspects of the scientific community, the technical community, so on and so forth, and other people who respect her work would pick it up. So that's what's happening around the 80s. Now, around this same time, I just want you to understand that this isn't the only thing that was happening around this time. Around this time, technology started to give birth to the idea of countercultures. Now, countercultures, this is really important, okay? Countercultures are, well, their definition is a little bit loosey-goosey, but you can think of a counterculture as something like capturing an existing culture and using it for your own means. And I want to bring up Aum Shinrikyo. I'm not pronouncing it correctly. This is a group. They're a religious movement and a doomsday cult that was founded by Shoko Asahara in 1987. And they used technology. They were one example, a light example of a terrorist cult group who, through what could be defined as a light counterculture movement, used technology to implement their own kind of outcomes that they wanted. The reason why I bring this up is because, again, in the 80s, there was something formulating under the covers that most of us probably were not noticing as we were enjoying Knight Rider and Star Wars and all of that. So this cult took a bunch of religious ideologies, Buddhism, Christianity, all of that. Like, you know what? Let's go down. Let's actually just have a quick look at it. Okay, how about this? Let's just read it a bit because I want you. This is super critical. I know it seems like, what the hell are you talking about? What does this have to do with anything? I promise you, like almost everything I do, I plan ahead. The last 1.5 years of all of this information where it's been boring and we've struggled through crap, it's all been planning ahead to this kind of stuff. So I promise you this will play in later. As a matter of fact, I will give you a little tidbit of it at the end. So although Aum, which is the cult party here, was from the beginning considered controversial in Japan, it was not initially associated with serious crimes. It was during this period, that Asahara became obsessed with biblical prophecies. Aum's, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing it wrong. Public relations activities included publishing comics and animated cartoons that attempted to tie its religious ideas to popular anime and manga themes, including space missions, powerful weapons, world conspiracies, and the quest for ultimate truth. And we now see one of the most important things that play out today. I want you to picture for a second, just try in your mind's eye to picture kind of like a straight line landscape of, let's say, with the 30s forward, where the concept of humans as digital inputs and outputs becomes a prominent factor. And people who view you, whoever's doing the following, I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody. People view you as digital inputs and outputs. And when they look at you that way, what they see is, hey, if we can control the inputs and outputs that you put before you, for example, if we can control what you see, right, we can impact your brain. We can manipulate you, etc. And like the PepsiCo CEO said, let me see if I can go back to the right place here. Yeah. As the PepsiCo person said, you can watch what people do as opposed to ask them what people do. And if you watch what people do, they behave differently. And then you can use that to, advertise. What is advertising? It is a digital form of infecting your eyeballs with, inputs, right? And so there's this concept that has been built up, which is like the mainstream media. Social movements are downwind of media, kind of a thing, right? And so if you control the mainstream media, what you can do is you can influence society because they inject all of those electrical inputs and outputs. When you play the video game, when you watch a show, when you watch me on screen, that's all infecting your inputs and outputs. And I'm going to take a pause here for a moment, and I just want to really, really stress this. Please, I beg of you, I do not want to grow up in a world where people no longer use their brains and they just go with a flow with whatever comes their way and whatever makes sense to them. Please use your brain. I'm actually begging. Please exercise your brain. Critically think about things. Ask why, ask how, ask when. If a high school dropout like me, I'm dumb. I do not have any formal education. I didn't even finish high school. If I can piece this stuff together and read novel after novel after novel, week after week, dense papers, academic, scientific, programmatic, etc., I am begging you to please, you guys are, most of you, okay, not all of you, I'm smarter than some of you at least, okay? Let's be real here, all right? But most of you are probably smarter than me. Please use your brain. Okay, now having said that, after I'm actually begging you to do that because it's extremely important, you can see how this cult group, realized that there is something to be said about creating, the stuff that we enjoyed and currently enjoy with anime, mangas, etc. And so they use that to promote their view of how they viewed the world. Now, as it so happens, they were also kind of influenced by Isaac Asimov. In Isaac Asimov's science fiction Foundation trilogy, there was a reference to depicting an elite group of spiritually evolved scientists forced to go underground during an age of barbarism to prepare themselves for the moment when they will emerge to rebuild civilization. Lifton posited that Ahm's publications used Christian and Buddhist ideas to impress what he considered to be the more shrewd and educated Japanese, who were not attracted to boring, purely traditional sermons. And now you have kind of the premise of what a counterculture could look like, insofar as they can adopt other things that do move stuff forward. They see it as like, hey, this actually works out in society. Therefore, let's co-opt it, essentially, and use it to promote our ideas. And so unfortunately what happened is because they saw the future as this kind of like scientific, technical dystopia, they decided to carry out terror attacks. I won't get into them. I don't think it's really that important to get into, what it is. I don't want to give them much more attention than I want to. However, note that they use technology to their advantage. They began to use wiretapping to get NTT, which is a Japanese telecommunications company, uniforms and equipment, and created a manual for wiretapping. And if we look at this is a Wired article that goes over it, and they absolutely did. Sure, whatever, Wired. I'm not gonna, but yeah, they used technology and they used mainstream like culture and media and whatnot to promote their ideas. So this is important. It seems like it's kind of like a little bit tangential. I promise you it's not. I want you to consider, just here's a tip. I want you to consider what kind of movements might exist today that would be considered counterculture movements, co-opting the same kinds of techniques just in whatever is appropriate for our time, and utilizing technology to get the outcomes that they want. All right, so let's carry on. Then we have extropy. Now, extropy was created by Max Moore, and the idea behind extropy is the extent of a living or organizational system's intelligence, functional order, vitality, and capacity and drive of improvement. It means the opposite of entropy, metaphorically interpreted as a tendency to degenerate and die out, and all of you are indeed degenerate. In 1986, Moore joined Alcor, a cryonics company, and helped establish, along with Michael Price, Garrett Smith, and Luigi Warren, the first European cryonics organization. Mizar Limited, Alcor UK, 1987, Moore moved to LA from Oxford University in England to work on his PhD in philosophy at the University of Southern California. And Moore uses extropy to push, transhumanist thought. Extropy, vaccine for future shock. This brought together thinkers with interests in artificial intelligence, nanotech, genetic engineering, life extension, mind uploading, idea futures, robotics, space exploration, memetics, and the politics and economics of transhumanism. Alternative media organizations soon began covering the magazine, and it attracted interest from like-minded thinkers. Later, Moore and Tom Bell co-founded the Extropy Institute, a non-profit educational organization. Now, the Extropy Institute, I had to go into the archives, and you can see right here, this is from 2003, I believe, so we are jumping a little bit ahead, but we're jumping ahead to look back at what they thought at the time, so I feel like I'm not doing any weird time travel stuff. So Max Moore, philosophies of life rooted in centuries-old traditions contain much wisdom concerning personal, organizational, and social living. Many of us also find shortcomings in those traditions. How could they not reach some mistaken conclusions when they arose in pre-scientific times? At the same time, ancient philosophies of life have little or nothing to say about fundamental issues confronting us as advanced technologies begin to enable us to change our identity as individuals and as humans, as economic, cultural, and political forces change global relationships. And so the idea here is that they are going to use the kinds of things that they promoted, or that they were researching rather, in order to do psychological and physical manipulation for the purpose of directing themselves into the future. So they're kind of co-opting religious ideas, much like the Om cult did in Japan, and then they're promoting their own viewpoint on that, which is, hey, spiritually, psychologically, and physically, nanotechnology, cryonics, etc., are going to help us into getting into the future. We're going to cover Extropy a bit more. I need to dig into them a bit more as we continue. So, for example, there are some members in here that I want to do a deep dive on, but we kind of have to go a little bit forward in order to look backward on them. So we're going to leave this here, but I just wanted to bring it up because it was during the 80s that this Extropy company was being created, and they did have this technocratic society in mind, and they were working in it, again, within the scientific community, and some of the people who were involved in it were also influential in some of the technology that we use today. Now, there is an article on the Extropians. Just so we have a little bit of an idea of what the Extropians were, this is the group that aligned themselves with the Extropy group. They started off thinking about cyberspace, which that Donna person, thought about as well, and a few others that we've covered already. They wanted to start in cyberspace. Then they started getting involved in Silicon Valley in California in the 90s. And so this kind of starts to bring us into the end of the 80s and into the beginning of the 90s. They thought themselves to be immortalists, such as the ability to live forever via computer, cyborg integration, etc., etc. They had these, kinds of like metaphysical issues. They talked about like copying errors, and then the idea was, oh, don't worry, we have redundant copies of who you are as I guess a techno human being, so we can just recreate the parts that failed. There's all kinds of stuff that played out here, and their research into this started to play out in California, and it starts to lead into the 90s. So let's continue, shall we? This one now talks about Bitcoin. And so if we go back to, let me just go back to here. The energy bucks, as promoted by the technocratic movement in the 30s, is very, very, very akin to Bitcoin. So where did Bitcoin come from? Well, it started to bloom in California in the 80s. And it's weird because we see Hal Finney, a Bitcoin pioneer and the first person to ever receive a Bitcoin transaction, was cryonically preserved by the Alcor Life Extension Foundation on August 28, 2014. Does anybody remember Alcor sounds familiar, does it not? Right? It sounds familiar, right? Oh, look at this. Max Moore, the guy behind extropianism. Guess what? The president and CEO of the Alcor Life Extension Foundation between 2010 and 2020. Are we starting to see the convergence of all the shit I've been talking about for years now starting to come together? How it's starting to play out, and where it's starting to centralize, and where these people are informed from, and how we all, fortunately or unfortunately, participate in this system as we build websites and software and all of that. Let's continue. So out of this extropianism, we get Bitcoin, right? So Hal Finney, used Alcor to cryonically store himself, and Extropy loves it, right? So Hal Finney got the first Bitcoin transaction. He goes through the cryonic freezing so that he can open himself up in the future to see what goes on. Hal was a frequent participant in the Extropian online discussions of cryonics, life extension, space colonization, nanotech, artificial intelligence, mind uploading, the transfer of human consciousness from biological brains to alternative high-performance substrates, and the technical, social, and political aspects of cryptography. Julian Assange lurked and occasionally participated. Are we seeing a convergence here of what's going on? Now they continue to grow. So you have a picture here: Simon Levy, Hans Moravec. We talked about Moravec already. Max Moore, Dave Krieger, Ralph Merkel, and Theo Moro. They're an extropian. Now again, just to remind you, Hans Moravec came from the involvement of the German space rocketry forward-looking technocratic systems, and somehow became involved with extropianism alongside Moore, who also had a background in the same kinds of things that we see, with regards to cyborgs and the integration of man and machine. And so they start working together, and out of this, they start pushing around the idea of cryptography. What is the Bitcoin blockchain, for example? It's based on, at least in part, cryptography. And so in order to create their own little utopian space so that they could hide or otherwise protect their efforts, they come up with the idea of Bitcoin. Now, the cryptography conversations led to PGP. Now, let me see if I have this. Here's the 90s. We start getting into the 90s, right? That's what I wanted to skip to. We start getting into the 90s. And in the 90s, cryptography and these kinds of like blockchain, Bitcoin, digital currency movements start to take place. And so here are the 90s. And so, in the 90s, we have a lot of fun stuff. We have MTV. So I just kind of want to harken you back to that. We have MTV. We have, I guess the Game Boy here. We have the phones. Let's see, what else do we have? The game room, stuff here. I don't know, cassettes. We have remember this puzzle thingy. I don't remember that. What else do we have? Oh, Flintstones. We have Tamagotchis. We have like the Super Nintendo. Let's go have a look at like video games that were around at the time. Right, so in the 90s, we've got 64. Yeah, we've got Super Mario World. We've got GoldenEye. We still have arcades. We've got Tomb Raider. I'm sure many boys at the time loved Tomb Raider. We've got Mega Man. Man, like the 90s were good, man. What else do we have? 90s, science fiction shows, right? Yeah, we've got, what is this? Babylon 5. We've got X-Files, more Star Trek, Star Wars, Farscape. I don't know if you guys ever watched Farscape. That was kind of a cool show. We got like RoboCop. We've got, Multipass. All right. Man, we had a lot of good stuff in the 90s. And so now we're entering into the 90s where these kinds of ideas that were boiling under the covers in the 80s continue to boil under the covers in the 90s. And okay, so we have what's called the cypherpunks in the 90s. Geez, that took me forever. I apologize, folks. The cypherpunks started to use cryptography to build internet privacy. Who were the cypherpunks? Well, in 1991, you start out with Phil Zimmermann, who created PGP. The Cypherspace Declaration of 1995 asserted that privacy is essential for democracy and advocated widespread access to cryptographic tools. So this is the influence that happened, that came out of what we have now, which is like Tor, VPNs, end-to-end messaging, etc. There were a group of activists, people who were around, the cryptography space, kind of like what we talked about with extropianism. And they wanted to create the ability to kind of create a border around their own ideas and in cyberspace, while also being able to operate within cyberspace. Then they did the same thing as what is typically done. They use media to push forward their ideas. And so there was Cyphernomicon, published in 1994. And this is from the Satoshi Institute or something like that, right? And they have an entire, I'll just zoom in, like a whole, like, it's almost a manifesto, right? Of how they want to move things, forward in in a lot of different ways. Then they actually predict the crypto wars, and so they're trying to think ahead. They're trying to think of how the government will use crypto against them, and how the government will co-opt crypto for themselves and their own outcomes. Then they have the foundations that come out of that. Satoshi Nakamoto creating Bitcoin, whoever that person is, and it becomes mainstream. And so you have this kind of built up. You can see how it gets built up from the 1990s forward. Now, I just want to bring up that there's the cryptography movement did also have a few other people that participated in it. Whitfield Diffie and Martin Hellman. You might recognize them as particular creators of particular cryptographic paradigms. But there's this idea of coming out of the stuff that people were doing with cybernetics, cyborgs, transhumanism. They saw the need for security, and so the cypherpunks kind of came out of that as they orbited the same people who promoted the technocratic, historical ideas, and they were just bringing it into modernity. Now, as we continue, we have the creation of eCash. It was created by David Chaum, I want to say. He thought of it in 1982, but it didn't come into actual production until about 1995 to 1998. And so we start to see the precursor of what would start to look like this kind of stuff, the energy bucks. And the eCash system was supposed to provide here we go. It was supposed to provide things like anonymity and the ability to only be tied to you. You would have the bank be able to determine when they should allow you to have access to your money or when they shouldn't for security reasons, etc., etc. And so this eCash system or DigiCash system starts to very much look like what the energy bucks look like, and it started to integrate cryptographic mechanisms into it that kind of spawned the entire background behind Bitcoin. And so here's another article about what is eCash or DigiCash. We've gone over it. It's supposed to help with the flow of money, yada, yada, yada. You stay anonymous. If you got your hands on some eCash, you couldn't use it, which means that theft would be what would be the point of theft? Why would you want to take someone's eCash if you can't verify that you're the owner, etc., etc. And just one more article about the cypherpunks, privacy-focused people. They have a manifesto, public key stuff. And so you get it. You get the point here, right? Let me go back. During this time, in 1991, we still have the promotion of ideological systems within technology. This website is still up. We have the creation of the VNS, a cyber-feminist manifesto for the 21st century. We are the future. I'm not even sure I can say this word. I'm not sure I can say it. But this, you can see, is the continuation of Margaret Mead's ideas back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, continuing to carry out in the 90s. We are the modern, I don't know if I can say this word, positive anti-reason. Positive anti-reason. Unbounded, unleashed, unforgiven. We see art with our word. We make art with our word. We believe in jouissance, madness, holiness, and poetry. We are the virus of the New World disorder, rupturing the symbolic from within, saboteurs of Big Daddy mainframe. I don't know if I can say this, is a direct, the thing, I guess the woman part is a direct line to the Matrix. Yes, the VNS Matrix, terminators of the moral code, mercenaries of slime, go down the altar of objection, probing the visceral temple, we speak in tongues, infiltrating, disrupting, disseminating, corrupting the discourse, we are the future, yada, yada, whatever it is. So what they essentially promote here is, yes, cyberfeminism. And the concept behind it is that you can use, I got to be careful what I show here. As a matter of fact, let me just, because I believe that, yeah, I'm glad I did, because right below that was something I would have gotten definitely struck for. And so the concept here, let me just go down a bit and just make sure it's safe. The concept here is exactly the feminist, sorry, no, not feminist, is exactly the cyborg merging of man and machine, because it promotes feminism, such as insofar as you no longer have to worry about feminism. We all become one. And so the feminist problem becomes everyone's problem. That's kind of the ideal here, right? They have, again, I got to make sure I'm not putting anything up on screen I shouldn't be. So let me just, okay, this should be fine. The 24th Biennial of Sydney, they have some events, Remix with Soda Jerk, they have Bad Code, they have Corpus Fantastica, Essential Fragments, we read the manifesto, etc. And then again, I just want to make sure I'm not like, you know, let me see the timeline. Nothing here really. Let me just show you this. But here's some of the stuff that they have. I think it's okay for me to show this stuff. They talk about this, and they essentially what they're trying to do is, this is another version of the counterculture movement, where they take feminist ideology and they embed it into the technocratic ideology, and they go, hey, it doesn't have to be this way. And you can kind of get a sense of how they like want to taunt men into it. Like, I'm just going to say the word and hope that I don't get struck for it, but the vaginas are an entry point into the matrix. You know, they're kind of like, it's kind of a very like sexually loaded terminology in order to attract attention, right? Let me go down a bit. In any case, yeah, I can't show that. Yeah, I can't show any of that. In any case, let's move on, shall we? Now, it is a very Masonic icon. That's right, Lappily. Now, let's get into someone that you all do know. In the 1990s, we have the creation of a few companies. And let's start with Peter Thiel. Now, Peter Thiel, born in 1967, co-founder of PayPal, Palantir, and Founders Fund, the first outside investor in Facebook, estimated to be worth $20 billion approximately. He has a law background. He founded Thiel Capital Management in 1996. And he co-founded PayPal with Max Levchin. Okay? Ukrainian-American software engineer. And Luke Nozick, entrepreneur, co-founder of PayPal in 1990. He was the chief executive of PayPal until it sold to eBay in 2002 for $1.5 billion. Now, we won't get into exactly what he did after the 90s because we're focused on the 90s. So we'll just kind of just set that part up. Now, it's very, very interesting, kind of his background. He loved playing D&D. He was a fan of J.R.R. Tolkien, which is where the term Palantir comes from. Valar, Mithril, Lembas, Rivendell, Arda, all originating from Tolkien names. He has a pretty good mathematics background. He read Ayn Rand. We will get into Ayn Rand, okay? And admired the optimism and anti-communism of then-President Ronald Reagan. He was valedictorian in 1985. He studied philosophy at Stanford. Multiculturalism. He co-founded the Stanford Review, a conservative and libertarian newspaper. And then he did his background in law, right? He capitalized on the dot-com boom when he returned to the Bay Area kind of in the 90s. And here we have a deeper dive into PayPal. Now, PayPal is one of these companies that kind of started to integrate a bunch of things that had come out from a lot of the stuff we've talked about. And some of the stuff we've talked about is the centralizing of currency, information, data, and lo and behold, it's in Silicon Valley. Now, I want to just make sure I'm not missing anything down here. I think that's okay. We've got Facebook. Facebook created React, so Facebook is just cancerous to society as a whole. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so we're going to come back to Peter Thiel a bit in a second. But as a result of PayPal being created, we have the PayPal Mafia. The PayPal Mafia is a group of people who join together. You have Jawed Karim, one of the co-founders of YouTube. You have Jeremy Stoppelman, CEO of Yelp. You have Andrew McCormick. Let's just have a look at this. I don't think we're gonna. We're not gonna find the actual person here, are we? No, we're not gonna find the actual person. I'll have to do a dive on that. We have Premal Shah, founded Kiva, worth $2 billion. We have Luke Nozick. We already covered. Ken Howery, PayPal and Founders Fund. He served as the U.S. ambassador to Sweden from 2019 to 2021 under Donald Trump. You have David Sachs, general partner of Craft Ventures, venture capital fund he founded in 2017, and an entrepreneur and author. You have Peter Thiel. You have Keith Rabois, part of Kozla Ventures. He was involved in early stage startups like PayPal, LinkedIn, etc. You have Reid Hoffman, co-founder, former executive, chairman of LinkedIn, podcaster, venture capital, etc. We've talked about Levchin. You have Roelof Botha, venture capitalist and company director. And you have Russell Simmons. He co-founded Yelp and co-founded PayPal, and etc., etc. Now you can see how the PayPal Mafia here attained great wealth and power. And helping to support companies like Facebook. You have Elon Musk, right? Since 2025, Peter Thiel helps with Doge. You have Elon Musk involved with PayPal, who founded Zip2. We'll get into that in a little bit here. PayPal COO. You have Scott Bannister here. All of these people are all involved. Hoffman currently sits on the board of Microsoft. You've got co-founder of YouTube. So we have a YouTube link here. Now we have 2 YouTube links, another co-founder of YouTube. All of these people got together during the late 90s while we were playing Tomb Raider and watching Digital Boobies on Nintendo 64. No, wife. Okay, no, wife. It was true, wife. You must understand, wife. That's what was... Yeah, you're too young. Young wife. Yeah, high five me, young wife. So while we were all enjoying the 90s, these people were collectively grouping together and they were amassing great wealth and power. And they were using the technocratic backbone, the stuff that was built from the technocratic backbone that had been built up through the past 50, 60 years previous. And it's really easy now to make the jump. I'm sure your minds are now making the jump from the late 90s to current day, right? But let's just dig into it a little bit more, because you know how we do around here. I don't just leave things up to your imagination. We actually get into it. So as we continue, just having a little bit of a deeper look at Peter Thiel, for example. We'll start with Peter Thiel, but we'll have a look at that because transhumanism and digital enslavement come back in full force, bros. They certainly do. But let's just take a few steps at a time. So Peter Thiel was involved in some stuff, political stuff. He published articles or newspapers, I believe, and perhaps even a book where he outright described his view on kind of what would be considered the left versus right today. And essentially, he was in disagreement with the idea of diversity. He was in disagreement with the idea of feminism and a lot of the multiculturalism, progressive inclusion, etc. Right. And so he had more of what would be considered today a right-wing conservative look on things. And you can see that play out today because he promotes the idea of Christianity. He claims to be a Christian himself, I believe. And this is just another form of counterculture. That's why I brought up the concept of counterculture, including the utopias in California, where they like section off portions of California to create their, techno utopia, because Peter Thiel is implementing essentially just another form of counterculture here, or he wants to lead to it. And so he uses his ideological background, which it comes from a more right-wing conservative perspective, right? But then he uses that as a jumping off point, a platform to hobnob with other people in Silicon Valley like Elon Musk and whatever in the late 90s and build these conglomerate companies. And essentially, it's all just a bunch of technocracy just bundled in yet again. It's just now being used in the opposite direction. Right, and you can start to see this in his life in the late 80s and early 90s, because of his published work, where he believes these things and he states them as part of what he believes, right? So it's coming out of his own mouth. And so as he amasses his wealth and whatnot, clings on to or goes deeper into his kind of religious Christian, Judeo-Christian beliefs, he talks about it more, and that kind of influences his decisions. Hey, during this time in the 90s, we have a few other movements that are popping up, which are going to become important later on. We have the Strategic Computing Initiative from the United States government during the early to mid 90s. And the idea here was that they would produce architecture and hardware for the purposes of artificial intelligence. The Department of Defense spent a total of $1 billion on the project. So the US government themselves are now starting to move forward in terms of hardware and artificial intelligence output. In the 90s, this starts to progress even more. Let's keep going. We have DARPA. DARPA now doing deep studies into neural networks. In the late 80s, which led into some of the stuff that they built in the 90s. They did a full-on review here of neural networks and how, let me just see here. Where was it? Yes, in 1987 in San Diego, they did a meeting on neural networks. They attracted almost 2,000 participants and attendees from all over the world. And they provide a full review of what they discovered after having talked to everyone. What are neural networks, etc., 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 theoretical foundations, so on and so forth. This is a huge thing. I'm going to actually read this in full. I have not read it in full. I'm just bringing this up because I want you to understand how things were brewing, under the covers, like I say, during the 80s and 90s. I'm going to be looking into the people who actually participated and, were part of this group. I want to see if there are any links, but here you go. That's essentially it. Then there is the Strategic Technology Office that DARPA created, I believe, in the late 90s. And so here what they're doing is they're attempting to do kind of like a little bit of an adaptation of the CyberSyn stuff in Chile. And the idea here is that they want to provide a way to ship mass amounts of information to technocrats at the top, or bureaucrats in some cases, whether political or otherwise, military and so on. And so they start looking at things like artificial intelligence, like the neural net stuff. They start looking at things like, economy, finances, etc. And they do research and development on it. And so DARPA just continues this. Now, what's interesting is that Metal Gear Solid 2 came out in 2001. Metal Gear Solid 2... DARPA was kind of, let's say, involved in Metal Gear Solid 2. If you've ever played Metal Gear Solid 2 and you want to see how correct they got the AI systems as they play out today, go play Metal Gear Solid 2, and DARPA was involved in that, all right? We have ARPANET, which we've already talked about, but in the mid-90s, ARPANET turned into what we consider to be the World Wide Web today. We've already gone over Lehovec and all of that. Let me just see. We've gone over that. There is one thing. The FM 2030. When was this out? It was published in 1989. Okay. So in line with the VNS cyberfeminist movement, we have this. Are you a transhuman? So around late 80s, early 90s, we have a book by this group called the FM 2030. because they were looking at 2030 as some kind of singularity point. And they published this book. It was published in '89, but it didn't become quite popular, I believe, until the early '90s. And this book goes into how you can determine whether you are a transhuman or whether you are capable of being a transhuman. This is essentially a checkmark book. Do you meet the criteria to being transhuman? 666 Fifth Avenue. That's right. That's right. The people who wrote this book, the people who published it, at least, 666 Fifth Avenue. They talk about your vocabulary. They talk about your ideological leanings. So below are the list of commonly used terms. Work your way down the page. Check the term column A, column B that is closer to what you would use. I want you to pay attention to the terms. Do you recognize an overlap with the terms that we see in transgenderism, feminism, in technocratic, cybernetic, cyborg systems, in even right-wing and conservative spheres? We see some words that we're going to talk about here. Let's go over some of the words. We're talking '89. And they're using transhumanism, which is the technical portion of integrating yourself with technology, to determine your social credit score as in regards to how well you would fit with technocracy or with transhumanism. Boyfriend, girlfriend, friend, lover, bachelor, single, unsuccessful marriage, dissolved marriage, illegitimate child, broken home, single parent home, promiscuous, fluid, open, liberated, test tube baby, in vitro fertilized baby, high-tech baby, homosexual, gay, sex object, lover, pornography, erotica, relationship, romance, friendship, linka, courtesy title, Mr., Mistress, Miss, no courtesy titles, only names, Dr. Jones, Sam or Sam Jones, secretary, assistant or associate, leader, catalyst or facilitator, masses, people, foreigner or alien, visitor from abroad, spiritual, religious or devout, holy places, holy land, religious places, God bless, goodbye, or may the force be with you. God willing, let's go for it. Artificial insemination or asexual insemination. Artificial organs, prosthesis, replacement parts. Far East, East Asia. Artificial intelligence, ultra-intelligent machines. Middle East or Near East, West Asia. Far West in the U.S., Western states. Free world, Western world. Third world, developing regions, man, human. This continues, and so you mark your total, and depending on your total, you're going to get a score. It's a rubric for how well you're going to be able to participate in the transhumanist movement. How post-industrial are you? Smart telephones, do you have one of those? Do you have a VCR? Do you have a satellite dish? How automated is your work environment? Do you have a fax machine, telex, decision assistant? Do you have an expert system? Where do you work? How much do you commute? What are your electronic bill payments like? Do you commute personally, or do you have do you use a headphone and listen to music? Let me see up here. Okay, blah, blah, blah. They continue down this line. Let's skip to the next one. How information rich are you? Which newspapers do you listen to? What about your television consumption? Which television news stations do you listen to? How informed are you? Why is it necessary for you to learn English? How time rich are you? How much do you work? Are you a workaholic? This continues. This whole book continues, and they talk about all kinds of stuff. Let me go back up to the contents up here. How affluent are you? How competitive are you? How ritualistic are you? How power-oriented are you? How fluid are you? How emotional are you? How intelligent are you? How family-oriented are you? How ecology conscious are you? How communitized are you? How global are you? How cosmic are you? What is your ideological orientation? How future oriented are you? How optimistic or pessimistic are you about the future? What is your level of humanity? How immortality oriented are you? And how transhuman are you? Let's go down to around section 23 here. Do you approve of corporal punishment? Do you believe people have the right to own firearms? Do you eat meat, including poultry or fish? Do you approve of Amnesty International? Non-violence because we're going to be cyborgs? Are you an ageist? Do you like the human body as it is? Etc. etc. Now, okay. I thought I remember this. How jealous do you feel in your romance, and so on and so forth. And then at the end, they describe how the future as a transhuman looks bright. And you have to essentially shed biological fundamentalism, because the future is now and you can replace your own body parts with technology. So you have to shed yourself of these, ideological systems that you believe in, and just essentially put your mind in a place where you can accept transhumanism. Because if you can't accept transhumanism, or if you don't meet any of these systems, then you're not going to make it, right? You're not going to be able to participate in the transhumanist movement. Now, I believe that's it. I believe that takes us to the end of the 90s.